Right, so I've had a straight edge up against the wall and I've established it's pretty flat. The only issue I've got is there is a stud here and over there somewhere that poke out a little bit more than the rest of them. And this will prevent the desk from moving into the wall as close as I want it to, because I want to minimise the shadow gap at the back as much as possible. Could be seen as an issue. However, what I'm going to do is, or what I want to do, is create two semicircular cutouts on the back of the desk, which will allow me to trail my cables from the monitor, webcam, phone, speakers and all the other crap that's going to be on it, behind the desk, along and down to two sockets down there. And this will just hopefully keep it a little bit more organised. What I can strategically do with these cutouts is place them in the location of these studs that poke out, and that will help it bring it into the wall a little bit closer and just minimise that shadow gap at the back. The other issue I've got is where this stud is, the wall kind of scoops back quite a lot, and that makes it really difficult to measure if that corner there is actually 90 degrees or not. It's a relatively new house, so I'm not entirely sure if the builders can be trusted with creating a 90-degree corner or not. So that creates problems when it comes to cutting the end of the desk, because I don't know if I need to do it dead on 90 degrees or a little bit under or a little bit over. I won't know until I fit the desk in this room, have a look and see how it registers against this wall. So what I'm going to do is cut it at 90 degrees, bring it in here, see what it looks like, and then probably take it into the garden and just circular saw it to the shape that it needs to be. It's a little bit of a ball ache, but that's what you get with fitted furniture. So anyway, with that in mind, I can get started with cutting the cutouts, I was about to say, shaping the cutouts on the back of the desk, and also I need to accommodate for the skirting board, because that's another thing that's going to prevent it sitting up against the wall. So semicircular cutouts, skirting board, that's what needs to be sorted. So the job I got started with was the semicircular cutouts on the back of the desk. This is a process you'll be familiar with seeing me do if you watched my curved cabinet build series earlier on in the year, link in the top right corner. It's called a tram-alarm, and it allows you to create a perfectly radiused edge, and it's much more accurate and just nicer to look at than doing something by eye and sanding it back to the line. Just allows you to get it perfect straight from the router. Now, a router can't chop out all of that waste at once, so I chopped back as far as I could to the line using the Faithfull jigsaw. So because it's a relatively deep cut I needed to do, I had to do it in two stages. So for the top half of the desk I followed the template round, and on the bottom half I got a face full of shavings. And then to prevent damage to the corners and make it a little bit easier to trail cables down there, I put a 3mm radius on either side of the cutout and round it over nicely. So now I'm just marking out the end of the desk that's due to sit up against the wall. Like I say, I'm cutting this to 90 degrees for now, hoping that the wall is going to be 90 degrees as well. I cut this using the Faithfull TS55 with the guide rail, and that allows you to get a perfectly straight edge without the use of a table saw. I didn't realise my manager was on the phone at this point. And once I had the height of the desk established, I could cut the leg to length. So next job was the skirting board. Didn't want to do anything too fancy and bespoke, just in case I need to move the desk at some point in the future and I have some sort of weird shaped skirting board. So I just drilled a small hole in the top using a Forstner bit, went back to the tangents of that circle using a marking gauge, and then that would allow me to cut to the lines using a saw and then chisel back to them to refine it. So before I went any further, I just wanted to give the board a quick sand over with an 80 grit pad just to get everything nice and uniform, and I could see if there was any other issues that I needed to address. And while I was doing that, I got rid of all the loose bark on the live edge of the board using some Abranet. This works quite well because the dust is able to be sucked straight through the mesh, and it's nice for tasks like this where you don't want too much dust kicking up in your face. Now this is the top side of the desk, and what I'm doing is just sellotaping over all of the voids that are visible, because I'm going to be filling them with black epoxy, but I'm going to be pouring it from the underside, and the last thing I want is for the epoxy to flow straight through some of the voids and then glue the desk to the workbench below, because being epoxy, that is not coming off. Now some of these knots had dead patches in them, so I wanted to make sure that those were gone before I started pouring in the epoxy, because I wasn't sure how stable it would be once it was all dried. So for this I'm using the slow setting West System epoxy, reason being that I want the epoxy to have time to flow deep into the voids before it starts thickening and not be able to flow properly. And here I'm adding the pigment, which is just blacker than death. It just looks like liquid death. It's horrible. I got it on my hands at one point, and this is a week later and it is still there. And here I'm just pouring the concoction of death into the crack. I wasn't planning on fixing it to start with, but I thought actually with all the crap that's going to fall in there and fluff and stuff, it's just going to look absolutely awful in a few months' time. So I thought the best course of action would be to fill it with the black epoxy that I mixed too much of. And here's the absolute mess that I ended up with at the end of it, with a warning to customers: do not touch the liquid of death. So once that had dried overnight, I could attack it with the Rotex, and I did that with an 80 grit pad again. Now you'll see on these that there's quite a lot of puddling around the cracks on them, and that's because it was a slow setting epoxy and these cracks just kept drinking up the epoxy, so I had to really overfill them to make sure that no voids appeared after it had all dried. I did this quite well on the most part, however you'll see in a minute that there was still a few bits where it continued sinking in, like here. You can see that bit there where it just kept drinking it up and then it dried, and here as well. But I can just go over those with a second coat and see where that takes me.